the kind of core theme is almost more a real experiential theme of really feeling and knowing like you're connected to something bigger than just you.
Katie Turner is a registered psychologist, speaker, and the founder of Katie Turner Psychology Inc. and the author of FU, Toxic Spirituality, Avoiding Red Flags and Navigating the Spiritual Path with Integrity. Katie believes in a holistic approach to healing. She has studied a wide range of Western psychological approaches and Eastern healing techniques. Katie's mission is to bring together the science of psychology to the practice of spirituality. Welcome to our show, Katie. Let's dive into the differences between psychology and spirituality. Where do you bridge the gap?
Yeah, it was interesting because the root word of psychology is supposed to mean soul, but I think Western psychology has really lost a lot of that connection. I definitely wasn't trained or considered myself to be a spiritual person initially in my path. A lot of Western psychology, there's a lot of focus on kind of conscious mind, like rational thoughts, behavior strategies. And I find the spiritual piece is almost that part of us beyond the human. I went through my own spiritual awakening after I was already really strongly in psychology. I was already on the path to registration. It wasn't something I really believed in other than maybe the power of a placebo effect of who knows what's out there. I don't know if we'll ever know, if we can ever experience that while we're here. And my own spiritual awakening really, it's almost more of a sense. People have, there's different paths for everyone, and the experiences can be a little bit different. But the kind of core theme is almost more a real experiential theme of really feeling and knowing like you're connected to something bigger than just you.
Mm.
And
Uh,
it's often, yeah.
hmm. Yes, that reminds me of this famous interview with Carl Gustav Jung with the BBC. This was like in the 1950s when a reporter asked him, "Well, do you believe in God or religion?" And he simply answered, "I know."
Yeah.
So, so,
Yeah.
obviously, you can't explain spirituality rationally or in concepts. There's a huge difference here between organized religion and spirituality. What, in your opinion, is the key difference between organized religion and the path you're on?
Yeah, well, I think religion it's more that's what's the group practices, the rules, the rituals, like the organization you're a part of. And spirituality is more what's your personal relationship with something greater than yourself, whether that's source, God, like whatever you call that, the universe, nature, flow. So they're almost different dimensions where someone can be very religious but not actually very spiritual. Someone could be spiritual and not religious. You can be both. You might not be connected to either one. So yeah, it's more the spirituality piece is more the personal relationship and experience.
Hmm. Uh, you obviously have different methods of how to nurture your intuition and how to find that connection to spirituality. Can you go into that a bit?
Yeah, I think intuition is almost more our compass point and direct almost line to that spiritual piece, and it's how that greater field communicates with us. It's that piece of prayer is almost like asking universe or the God for direction answers, and the spirituality intuition is like the answer coming in. Or often our rational mind wants like the answer of here's exactly what to do and how it'll look and like what's going to happen in the all on all the steps. The intuitive part is usually more of like this is the right step right now, and there may be a sense of a bigger vision, but it's really one step at a time. So it is an unlearning. There's a lot of unlearning of our logic and ego running the show and planning everything. Most Western cultures are pretty dominant in terms of logical, like from such a young age, we're trained to plan. What do you want to be in the future? Reverse engineer this, like figure out all the steps. Whereas intuition, I think, is more this personal compass of where are we on our path? How closely are we aligned to our own soul purpose, like sense of deeper meaning, like who we are as unique individuals here. And it can come through it's often really a subtle inner knowing. It's not just logical mind getting answers. It can be people tend to have a dominant intuitive sense or ability. It is if someone would have told me over 20 years ago that I'd be specializing in intuitive work, like I would have thought that was the most ridiculous thing anyone could have said. Like there's no way I would have believed that. I didn't know it was if it was real or not. And I also you hear stories of people who are kind of born like talking to spirits or they see their angels from a young age and but intuition can really be it's a skill set like any other where we do tend to have a natural some people are more naturally inclined to it just like some kids pick up sports much more easily and some are a little more
Mm,
clumsy so there is kind of a natural set point but it's also something we can learn to listen to and work with and the more we pay attention to it the stronger it gets the the more we can have faith in those messages it evolves over time so there's a few points in terms of if people want to open it up. The first one is actually having space to do that. Like we have to, our capitalistic, like busy hustle culture, we're often in our rational mind and fretting over problems, trying to figure everything out, asking for advice. Like we need to time where we're just meditating out in nature, listening to ambient music, like something where you're actually there's space for that knowing to just kind of come in where we're not searching for answers.
mm,
Um, we need to start paying attention to it too, whether it's those signs and synchronicities, those kind of repeating like divine coincidence patterns that it seems you're like statistically this seems really unlikely that this would happen this frequently. Some people it's dreams, but we all tend to have one or two dominant sensory abilities. So for some people it might just be like a sudden knowing or a gut feeling without really knowing why. Some people it is more like it might be sight or auditory. It's not like the movies usually where it's like seeing the spirit right in front of you 3D
mm,
world. It's like sometimes it might be something like a repeating number or a message on a billboard just really jumping out and grabbing your attention. And the difference with regular sensory information is there's often a different experiential quality when you're getting a message like that in your own body. Like you might get goosebumps, time slows down, you feel really present, you might get a sense of deja vu like there's something going on inside that signals there's something more here to pay attention to. For me, my dominant ability when I started was more the clairsentient or the empathic. So it was really feeling energy in my own body, whether that's like really feeling a shift in emotions or even physical sensations. I was both a physical and emotional empath. So if someone had a headache, like I could suddenly have a headache without realizing that that wasn't even mine and that with someone and if they were like oh I have a headache like it would just go away and so it wasn't until I was kind of mid 20s when I realized that was even happening through an intuitive development workshop and it was a big light bulb moment of like how if my experience is shifting so much inside myself with these different exercises with people I don't know and they're reflecting back like that is exactly how they're feeling like how long has this been happening? Because Western psychology doesn't even usually, like most of it would say that that is not possible. Like we have mirror neurons, we can have empathy for others, we can imagine what it's like in their situation. And yes, I also agree, like we're not living anyone else's life. We're not the expert on them. We don't know better than they do. But for people with an empathic ability, it's like our internal feelings can shift a lot depending
mm,
on what's going on
mm,
around. So but knowing your dominant sense or even having an idea of what that might be it's like then we can work more consciously with it because we can meditate we can be see like what are the impressions I'm getting with this sense often we want a different one like people often want to see or get these messages or want it to look a certain way but we kind of have what we have and we got to work with where we are and then the others will open up over time and we usually want intuitive information for these big, high intensity decisions in our life. Like this stuff that we're asking everyone, what should I do? Like this is big,
mm,
it's stressful. And that is the hardest type of information to get intuitively because our emotions are so tied into it. We often need to develop trust. So I also really recommend that people play with it, use lower stakes stuff, have fun with it, like experiment with it with smaller things of, oh, I'm meeting this new person. What kind of impressions might I get? When there's no emotions on the line, it's a lot easier to distinguish what's intuitive and what's not intuitive. And that practice helps us for when there are those bigger decisions to be more in touch. But if we're
mm.
just trying to harness it then, it's usually not going to help us a whole lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You mentioned some very important points there. My personal opinion is that institutionalized religion or the clergy more or less create a barrier to intuition and real spiritual experience because they tell us what to do, how to behave, and how to act in a certain way. And schooling your intuition, of course, especially in that place of quiet solitude, I think very few people are in today's world even able to do that. How do you create that space of quietness, of solitude, in order to listen to the whispers of the universe?
Yeah, and for sure, I think on the religious side, it really depends on the organization. Some people can be very supportive of their spirituality. Sometimes there's almost religious trauma to work through, or other like so different depending on the environment, the culture, like who's in it. And I do talk about that a bit in my book in terms of like red flag pieces, like not just for religious leaders but spiritual leaders, because you can have people who are very claim to be very spiritual or have high level gifts, but if they're not working on their own shadow, if there's certain stuff of their ego playing out, it's like sometimes you can have unintentioned harm in spiritual spaces, whether it's more organized religion or just the spiritual community in general. And so I saw a lot of harm when I was going through my own awakening and experienced some personalities that I was, oh, this is not really not healthy. And I saw a lot of that with my clients, and it's just such the spiritual awakening world. When you Google those symptoms, you get such a host of responses coming up, and there's a lot of like unregulated people speaking about it. And there's many that are like great, but it's a vulnerable thing for people to be going through because it is one of these phenomenon that many people experience it, but most people don't talk about it with other people because there is a fear of being like mislabeled or judged or like losing credibility. And so, again, I don't think it's like only registered health professionals have all the answers. I think there's benefit to many different people, but it's more, I think for general population, it's helpful to have a guideline of what to look out for and red flags. And
Touch on that a bit. What are
yeah.
the red flags to watch out for?
Well, I do think there's a spectrum, and from my experience in psychology and mental health for about 2 decades, most harm is well-intentioned people just at their own level of healing, doing the best they can with where they're at. And a lot of it's unintentional, a lot of it is not conscious. Like most people are good people trying to do their best, but there can still be problems where, I mean, to hold really clean, like if you're in a power dynamic space with someone, if they're vulnerable and coming to you as like a healer and intuitive, it's a very sacred space to be holding, and not everyone can keep that clean. Like not everyone is working on their own shadow stuff, their own inner child, their own ego, their own wounding. It's not about having that, but it's about, can someone recognize it and are they committed to doing that work so that it's not spilling into their client work
Hmm.
or in the spaces they're holding. Like I've seen things like sexual abuse or violations or like financial coercion, stuff where it just gets really muddy and icky, or like pressure, fear-based tactics, like someone, if anyone wants to be the source, if someone thinks they have all the answers, their path is the only way. And so sometimes this is people at their own level of healing. There's also a small percentage of the population that does have more like antisocial, psychopathic, narcissistic high traits or tendencies, or potentially even personality disorders. And that's across the population. And spiritual communities are not immune to that too. So sometimes there's people who are actually very dangerous, and people can end up very traumatized after if they get into too much of a dependent relationship with
Hmm.
them. But I've seen some personally myself and from client stories. Sometimes they have high psychic and spiritual abilities. So they're talking this talk, they can talk about these dimensions and realms, like they may seem to have all these gifts, but it doesn't mean like that on its own doesn't mean they're actually a safe person. Yeah.
A lot of these so-called cult leaders obviously catch people when they're in a very vulnerable situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're going through trauma and are looking for something for healing, and then they just get caught by the wrong person.
And those are almost more the extreme examples. I think there's a lot of stuff that happens that isn't as sensational, but is still can be harmful. And I mean, part of it too is it's my hope is to help inform people of what to look out for, but also if people are like in a coaching space, healing space, energy work space, for their own reflection to be like, how do you keep this safer? Of like, what are the things to consider? Because I'm not saying therapists or like regulated professionals are all safe. They're definitely not. Like a lot of our even my own registration requirements, a lot of the investigations are like ethical code violations, harm that's been done to clients, so that it exists in every space. But at least with regulated pieces, it's like there is a level of training. There's a level, there's a regulatory body, there's somewhere to go to lodge a complaint. There's an investigation process, and anyone who's violating those like does know better because they have done the training, they've done the exams, like they know better, but there's something else going on there. Sometimes I think in coaching spaces, and again, there's great coaches, I'm not bashing coaches, but I think sometimes if people don't know the limits of, if they haven't had the same level of training, they may just not know the limits of, okay, you did something cool around trauma, like are you actually qualified to really work with all kinds of trauma and know all the risks that can come with this? Like, do you know where to refer? Do you know who this is appropriate for? Do you know who it's not appropriate for? Like on the mental health side, there's the piece of, oftentimes spiritual awakenings are actually part of a very helpful connection for people and very healing, very profound, very transformational. It's not necessarily a sign anyone's like going quote unquote crazy or having a mental health crisis, but people can be very concerned about talking about it. So the DSM doesn't have a lot of places to put it. There's like a little bit at the end of like spiritual or religious experience. It's a few sentences long, or there's like psychosis, bipolar episodes. There's like you are out of touch with reality. So I do understand as someone who's trained in that world why people are hesitant to say like, oh, I'm talking to my ancestors or like these angels are coming through, right? This profound union with nature and God. And I think more and more are open to it. And you don't need someone who's necessarily an expert. You just need someone who's open to not pathologizing it and really exploring. But sometimes spiritual communities without the mental health training can go too far the other way too and just be like, oh, this is just a spiritual awakening, where sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's actually this is overlapping with possible psychosis, bipolar episode. Like we're complicated layers as humans.
Mm.
And so it's usually not just one thing or another, and every individual is so unique that there can be danger in engaging in spiritual practices if someone is not in a stable position, if they are getting more and more out of touch with being able to function in day-to-day reality. Like it's not always helpful for people, and it can be traumatic for some people
Mm.
too.
Mm. And of course, a lot of these toxic spiritual leaders or clergy um, don't have any knowledge about psychology, and then say something stupid like just pray and you'll be healed. Uh, uh, but it's not that easy, as you say. Every individual is so complex. But can can a spiritual path be part of a trauma healing process?
Yeah, I definitely think for some people it can be very helpful, very healing. Again, every person has their own path. It has to fit for the person. It is possible to have a trauma healing path without spirituality. But I mean, even the neuroscience around spiritually connected brains, and you can sub out those terms for flow state, meaning centered brains. Like there's many different words we could use to describe it, where it doesn't necessarily have to have a religious connotation for people. But if people who are more kind of spiritually connected, deeper sense of meaning, purpose, beyond just the material achievement oriented brain part, like those brains show up a lot more healthy. They're more resilient, less prone to depression or anxiety. There's more of a sense of meaning or purpose. So it's definitely in terms of a whole rounded life, like that spirituality, meaning, purpose, something beyond just the material needs alone is very, I think, essential for a whole like full spectrum human existence. And that can definitely be a huge part of a trauma healing path. A lot of the message I want to help like get out there too is again on that toxic level of things. There's a lot of stuff that's been broken down into like really simple kind of bite-sized pieces, and it's lost some of its deeper context and nuance where okay, yes, it's a spiritual being in a human body. And yes, that spiritual is really important, but do not forget we're still in a human body. And there's a lot of things that can like just bypass that completely of like you said, like pray. If you're not praying enough, if you're not trusting enough, if your faith isn't high enough, you're somehow failing, or you've manifested this, or like you've caused this to happen for you. And you should be able to just change it with the power of your thoughts and intentions alone. And it's very toxic. Like, and especially it can be very, if people are connected to that, if that's helpful for them, and many people go back and forth. Even spiritual people can go back and forth between like, I need just the human, like I need to vent, I need to be in the hard emotions, I need to feel this. And there's times, even it could be in the same conversation where it's like, and I want the spiritual, like now this is helpful. So we need to be, I think it's more of an emotional maturity and getting better at holding space for people of where they're at. I've seen a lot of clients get really gaslit by their communities and teachers and mentors or others around, like if they decide to take mental health medication or like hormone replacement therapy for very real concerns. And yes, sometimes the pharmaceutical piece, there is concern of like if you're just medicating everything away, you're not dealing with the root of the problem, like that's an issue. But there's certain concerns where like medication can very really help people feel more like themselves, be more connected, like help regulate the physical. So again, I don't think there's any one path, and it's just about having like more space for people to
Mm.
choose what's right for them.
Yeah. How do you explain this growing movement, especially in the United States, on the one hand, back into religious orthodoxy, secularization? There's two big camps there. People disassociating themselves completely
Mhm.
from religion, and then going to the other extreme on the other hand. What's happening there?
Yeah. I don't know. I wouldn't say I have enough information or expertise to like speak on that topic in general, but there's definitely some of Brene Brown's work has talked about even this is like years and years ago before COVID, before everything that's happening now, of like there seems to be an increase of polarization and division happening as a population as a whole. Like people tend to be going more and more in towards like right or left, more extreme, and the more extreme you get on either end, the more you say you believe very different things, but you start acting more and more the same. And it starts getting into these almost like echo chambers of like only talking to people whose beliefs are like yours, getting further entrenched in that, like not and it can get into almost dehumanizing or demonizing other people. So I do think there's a concern. I see more and more of it kind of in psychology practice in general, in terms of like, it seems like there's less. I think we need more people and almost skills. We're not taught this in school. It's like whatever we get from our families is what we come out with. And for most of us, that is not a great starting point. It's very rare. I think that's happening now. We have more cycle breaker generations, like really trying to give our children that. But that's a relatively new movement. And but a lot of adults, we don't have a lot of like emotional self-awareness, like that ability to go within and reflect to see like what of this is mine, what's coming up for me, how do I take care of myself in these hard emotions, like how do I deal with the uncertainty and like the self-regulation, the ability to listen to other people's viewpoints and engage in like empathetic, constructive conversations to say we don't have to agree the same thing, but where's the common humanity? And a lot of the research has kind of shown that like a lot of the antidote to that polarization and division is actually like knowing people who are different than us on a human level, like as a neighbor, as friends, like someone where we can almost break bread with them and know different worldviews than ours, where it doesn't have to be as threatening of like there's room for us to exist together. So and also like there's another side too where again, I can't speak as an expert on the whole political division piece, but in individual therapy too, there's a piece where some people are very self-motivated, where they will come to do their development work. They will look within. They're motivated to self-reflect for its own sake. That I think is a small percentage of the population. I don't think it's the majority. Many people will then come and do something different when nothing is working anymore. Like, so I also wonder if we're in a period of almost like a symbolic death before rebirth is coming or heading. Because sometimes, like personally, things can get so much worse before they get better. So that's where I want to focus my energy and be like, be where can I help support that? But
There seems to be almost addiction to certain beliefs, and it's not only religious belief, but political ideology, whatever, and the inability to really self-reflect. As you just said, it's a very small percentage of the population. Most people are driven by fear and anxiety, possibly, and a lot of the
yeah, and a lot of our media outlets, social
yeah.
media algorithms, like political pieces, a lot of there's some psychological pieces that of like almost manipulation tactics that have been around for a very long time. And when you know what to look for, you can kind of see it in different people's speech or different. So, and like what we're fed constantly does affect us individually.
Certainly, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. But how do you protect yourself against the narrative of fear and anxiety out there? Because a lot of people seem to be really deeply affected by it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a few different things. I think there's a part of it's, it's such a complex topic where I know I kind of missed answering your question around like that space for yourself. It's like I think that we need some boundaries on like that balance of how do we be informed, but also realizing a lot of these channels are actually like designed to keep people engaged and consuming it. Like they're not neutral. They've actually used psychological principles to be like, how do we keep you scrolling? How do we keep you coming back? How do we keep you on this as much as possible? And it's their agenda is not like it's not to make you feel good necessarily. It's to keep you engaged,
Mm.
which often doesn't feel good. So I think sometimes it's like, okay, what are the boundaries for yourself around where are you getting your news information sources from? Like, what's the balance of staying informed and knowing what you need to know, but then also being like, okay, that's enough for today. Setting some limits on that. Do we need a digital detox? Again, connecting with other people on a more like human level, being open and that time to go within too, because I think like one of the biggest benefits I find for intuition and intuitive connection, like for myself and that I see with clients too, is that like at the stronger we build that, and it is a process, it's a relationship like any others. It's not like, oh, just trust it. Like, no, you need to actually have some experience behind it to build trust with it. But the more trust there is, and the more you can actually return to this like source feeling, knowing, like it's not about living there all the time, but the sense of like there is this personalized guidance system between you and the universe, like you're not alone anymore. It's not like you're this just small human having to fight for survival. You're like, there's something here that because it can be so profound and transformational. The messages that'll come through. It's like the feeling and the peace that will descend on people and ourselves when we connect there. We can come back to this like no matter what's going on, everything's okay.
Mm.
And there's this balance there of not. It doesn't mean okay, you completely disconnect from the world and you don't it's like you don't engage in it at all, but it might be coming back to like, well, what's my purpose? Where do I actually want to feel called to add love to the world? Not out of fear, not out of fighting what's going on, but it's like maybe I want to just shovel the neighbor's sidewalk or like be very kind to the cashier today and connect with them. It's kind of like comes back to almost Viktor Frankl's like man's search for meaning piece of like no matter what's going on, the last of human freedom is the ability to choose how to respond in that. So I think it's like it's really taking care of ourselves, our energy, trying to have supported like-minded community around us, having places to process our own pain and our own difficulties and the struggles of the world, and come back to that sense of peace. Because I think it's about you don't fight fear with fear. It's like
Mm.
when you can connect to that love and really be what the actions can be more in service of that.
Yeah. Are there daily habits or rituals that you could recommend for our listeners?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's everyone's situation is going to be unique. So a lot of it can kind of depend on where people are in terms of their privilege of like survival, of like how are they struggling just to survive. So I do think systemic change is also kind of needed for so many people too. But at a certain level, it can be saying, okay, where are there times where I might, maybe just turn off distractions and maybe meditate, maybe connect with gratitude. Maybe I go for a walk in nature. Maybe I just put out a request for like show me a sign or guidance and be open to that coming in while you're driving your kids around, while you're on your like morning walk. It's like because I think there's still the piece of, we can't it's not realistic to necessarily meditate like 8 hours a day. Even an hour a day can be too much sometimes.
Mm.
And so it's like, where can we get those little pieces? And neurologically, even like 3 to 5 minutes of spread out over the week is actually better than 1 hour once a week.
I can go with that. Yeah, I've tried Zen meditation, and of course, the monkey mind always comes back with thoughts and going back to the past, the future, and it's not easy. And I find these short uh, moments of solitude, for me personally, far more effective. Well, thank you very much for being on our show, Katie. Last message for our listeners.
Not that. Thanks so much for having me here. And I mean, if people do want to find out more, some resources to support, I do have like a free quiz to discover your intuitive type. And there's a like 6 week challenge that goes out with that just for reflection exercises to help hold that container for people. So that's all at my website, but helpful for people.
And the links we'll post in the show notes below. And I want to acknowledge you for all the work you're doing, Katie. I think it's so important for our world today to spread positivity, to press kindness and more compassion in our world, more spirituality in the true intuitive sense. So thank you.